On October 3rd, 2024, the James Monroe Museum in Fredericksburg, Virginia, presented Waiting for Lafayette, a dramatization that is inspired by real people and events. It is November 5th, 1824. In Charlottesville, Virginia, former U.S. Presidents Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, and sitting President James Monroe, all members of the Board of Visitors of the University of Virginia, are awaiting the arrival of their mutual friend, the Marquis de Lafayette. A dinner in Lafayette's honor is planned for later in the evening. As the three Virginia politicians and statesmen wait for their famous guest, we will quietly eavesdrop.
It has been an auspicious start to our day with the Board of Visitors meeting of the University of Virginia, your original Central College, sir. I am very honored to have been serving on this board for the last 8 years. I remember well October 6, 1816, when we laid the cornerstone. And these memories today make me think about the upcoming reunion with our dear friend, General Lafayette. Jefferson, do you have any words of wisdom about recollections about the man at this point?
Indeed, could we have benefited from having the general there at that time of the cornerstone, because, as you know, gentlemen, he's always been devoted to education. And we have discussed it many times over the year. I will tell you that when I reflect back upon our first meeting, having heard of him for some time, it was in that terrible year of war, the spring of 1781. We had, if you recall, moved the capital of Virginia from Williamsburg to Richmond. Our concern had been for a time, once the war began, that the enemy could sail up either the James or the York River and lay siege to the capital there in Williamsburg. And so the time arrived when it appeared the war was imminent to find its way into Virginia. And so there I was at the desk of governor. And it fell upon that desk to order a retreat from Williamsburg to Richmond. And, you know, I declare, I was the last
Ignore me. Technical difficulties, ignore me.
How can you be ignored, dear?
The impertinence of this woman.
Well, now is that not what our university is all about? Such contrivances here. Why, maybe someday women will be admitted. You never know, gentlemen. But what I wanted to remark is that once we removed our capital to Richmond, we were not spared. The enemy did sail up the James River. You, of course, remember who led them.
We do indeed, do indeed.
Mm-hmm. The traitor, Arnold. And so once more upon my desk we had to order a retreat. And the individuals who helped enlighten me of the advance of the enemy were you, Mr. President, as Colonel of Virginia Militia, and General the Marquis de Lafayette. That's how we first met. I did.
Excellent, sir. Mm-hmm. Mr. Madison, your thoughts about?
Well, yes, I had known of the Marquis when I was serving in Congress, and the reports from the field, of course, would always include his name. But the first time in which I was really became more fully acquainted with him was in 1784. Now, the war was over. I had just finished my duties with the United States and Congress assembled, and was in Virginia and contemplating becoming a member of the Virginia legislature, and happened to be in Baltimore when the Marquis arrived in Baltimore, and we met one another by chance. He invited me to attend with him a journey to Fort Stanwix. He was intending to witness a treaty between the Indians and the new government and the state of New York. And being always caught up by the enthusiasm of this young man, I wish he could learn more about being more enthusiastic. The gentleman was just effusive in his behavior. I had had some French, of course, in college, but that was more of a Scottish French. So we had some problems communicating, but nonetheless, we embarked on that journey north. I was going to leave his company in New York City, But he was so charming in those 2 days to travel to New York that I decided to accompany him all the way to Fort Stanwix. And I may speak to that a little bit later, but that was the first time I got to meet him. And I can only say that the journey was enhanced by a circumstance that had nothing to do with politics at the time. The Marquis was not given to wearing much in the way of covering in that cooler weather, but he did receive a rather a gum taffeta raincoat as a cover, and he sported that. He had just received it from France, and unfortunately it was wrapped, and he did not have time to disattach the newspapers in which it was wrapped. So all the way to Fort Stanwix, one was able to read the Journal de Paris and the Courrier de l'Europe and others such. It was a source of fascinating conversation amongst us as to what was transpiring in France nearly a month or two ago, and through this particular device. It was it was so enthusiastic. He was so energetic that I continued with him, and we spent quite a time up there, almost a month.
Well, I can well appreciate your sentiments. I can remember well when I first met the Marquis. It was in 1777. It was in
I declare. Oh, my.
It is so good to see you.
Bonjour, mon
Oh,
ami.
my friend. It has been a while.
I
That's been a
declare. Nearly right on time. You can never tell a horse when to arrive. Look at me. Well, I cannot spare the opportunity. Do you know your reflection was upon the year 1784-85? That was the last time that the general was here in our nation. How blessed we are that he has finally
You are
returned.
blessed indeed, sir.
Going to have to revise
Oh, there you are, mon ami.
It's so good to see you. It has been a while.
Monsieur Madison.
Monsieur Madison.
C'est bien de vous voir encore, monsieur. Je
You do
dois
not have to do that for me.
embrasser. Oui, c'est ça. Merci.
Bonjour, my good friend. Excellent. Oh, I'm glad to be here. This is for me.
This is for you.
There we are.
Gentlemen, as I was saying, I can remember well the first time I met our esteemed friend. I was a 19-year-old soldier with the 3rd Virginia Regiment in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and it was August 27th. It was a Saturday evening when he first arrived in camp. Major General at the age of 20, 19-year-old captain in the Army here. And I was overjoyed to meet such an enthusiastic gentleman, as you mentioned, President Madison. His enthusiasm overwhelms us all in a very good way. And his desire to be a part of our revolutionary movement as a volunteer, unpaid, to learn from us and take that example back to his own nation of France and to pursue religious and actually independence from their own situation there and their nation. I think that he charmed everyone, and it was an amazing experience. And 19 days after that initial meeting ensued the Battle of Brandywine, September 11, 1777. And the Marquis, the Major General Lafayette made a very vital appearance near the end of that conflict when Washington's right flank had been turned, and it was very apparent the American Army had to leave the field of battle or possibly lose their entire army to British forces. And the Marquis arrived at Birmingham Hill, right behind the 9th Pennsylvania Regiment. And he took charge, as you well know, made the men fix bayonets, and actually forced some of the soldiers to move forward. And in the process, he was wounded in the left leg. Andrew Wallace, a soldier with the 9th Virginia Regiment, came to his assistance, but not before Lafayette made sure that an orderly retreat began to save the American army. He was less concerned with himself, more concerned with the salvation of the American army at that time. After Andrew Wallace helped him to his feet, I happened on the scene and escorted him to the Birmingham Friends Meeting House for initial treatment before he left for convalescence after receiving that initial treatment. But those were my initial reflections at that time. But I came to know Lafayette better later that fall as we went into winter encampment at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, December of 1777. And for, as you all well know, the worst winter on record in that time. And troops were slow to be provisioned and paid. Troops were suffering from malnutrition. It was a very tough time, but Lafayette and I became endearing friends at that point, and I met a colleague of his who happened to be the secretary to Baron von Steuben, the inspector general who eventually became a major general in the Army, responsible for training the American Army at Valley Forge and bringing that Army up to speed in terms of proper European-style tactics. We were an untrained Army prior to that point. And Baron von Steuben brought along his secretary, Pierre du Ponceau, and I became quite enamored with this young man. He was very much like you. Could be very well related, or even a student of yours, because same demeanor, very extroverted individual. I was very introverted as a young man. And we began sharing stories like I had with you about the ideals of the Enlightenment and the noted authors and poets of that time. And my favorite was Mark Akenside, my favorite poet, and we exchanged many discussions during our limited free time during the encampment, and I became quite a friend of his. And he brought me out of my shell, Pierre de Bonceau, and I'm grateful for that. So those are my initial memories of my early years, many years ago, with Lafayette during the Revolution. President Jefferson, how about you, about recollections during the American Revolution or times with Lafayette?
Well, yes, as I was saying, in the seat as governor, second elected governor of our Commonwealth of Virginia, it was the general, let alone yourselves, that informed me about the advance of the British up the James River. And therefore, being forewarned, we were able to retreat the farther into the wilderness of Western Virginia, and where better but Monticello. To retreat there. And I think, gentlemen, you remember, I know you do, Mr. Madison, I was waiting for Monday, June the 4th, 1781, for 2 years, because that was the day that I could resign as governor of Virginia. Well, you could not succeed yourself, you know, it was only for 2 years you could serve. And so I was waiting for that day, and once it arrived, well, you know, Mr. President, I was nearly captured by the British, had it not been for the valor of a gentleman we referred to, General, as the Paul Revere of Virginia, young Jack Jewett, who warned us of that advance. But I cannot help but reflect upon the gentleman you referred to, and your good friend, Monsieur Pierre-Etienne du Ponceau, because perhaps as you have ventured to Philadelphia, we have heard that you met Monsieur du Ponceau there, who has become quite the successful attorney at law. And I believe in a correspondence, you may remember, I mentioned him as engaged in a collaboration with me to study extensively the various languages of the Aborigines here in North America, as best we can, particularly in the East, that we might come up collectively with a dictionary of native languages that can help us better understand, if you will, the etymology of many of their words, their phrases, but more so their lineage and their connections in generations past. So I'm delighted that as he came here as the Secretary von Steuben and became your good friend, that he has stayed on to the benefit of our nation. And General, perhaps as you journey through our nation, the same enticement may have you remain here, perhaps?
Perhaps. I do consider myself not only a friend, but a fond member of this country, I will find myself going back home. I've been told that there's an anniversary next year, so I may stay longer in the Americas than I intended originally in order to be at that anniversary next year.
We have certainly seen the outpouring of American response to your arrival, even much before you came to your visit here this year. The number of towns and villages and cities and their preparations for your arrival, the mere mention of your name was to excite a passion in this country and a unity of activities in the various towns and cities, which we had not seen for some time. And even now, in the brief conversations we have, we realize that even to mention your name is not merely to mention the name Lafayette, but also to, in mentioning your name, there's just an effusion of other names with people with whom you've had association, and your very presence seems to spark our recollection of those other events. It's not to lessen our esteem for yourself, but you do, at fault, remind us of so many things beyond yourself that it is a pleasure to have your company again.
The pleasure is truly mine. I would like to mention when I was shot, I do not move nearly as fast as I used to. This is why I carry this cane.
I believe, is it true? I remember you telling me when we worked together in Paris, you still carry the projectile, do you not?
Well, of course, I do. Sometimes it gives me more trouble than others.
And I hope at the moment our conversation has quelled any kind of trouble.
Of course, of course. There is no trouble here. I am just very honored and very proud to be among such great individuals.
Thank you.
Do you remember, my friend Lafayette, our journey to the north, to Fort Stanwix? It was our first time to really spend any great deal amount of time with one another. We had Caraman with us also, and the four of us had been traveling north to Fort Stanwix, and we also had the Marquis, the Marbois, who arrived with us apparently, and the Comte de Marbois. And we had rather limited resources, so I remember taking the charge of our trip. I believe you had taken charge of the horses, and Caraman had taken charge of our lodging, and Marbois was in charge of the food. We thought it perhaps more appropriate to have a Frenchman doing the food than not. But it was such a journey, such a number of passages through paths and making our way to the Onondaga Indian tribe, the Oneidas, I believe it was, and the journey so intimate, involved, and sharing with one another. But I don't think there was a moment in which there was not a lightness and a latitude of enthusiasm and excitement during that journey, and I really appreciated the time to spend with you during that time.
Well, the pleasure was mine. I believe you had only intended on staying with me for a couple of days,
Yes.
but you ended up extending your stay with me, much like I am extending my stay here this time.
Let's hope it's less financial to you than it was to me.
What do you think of our university?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's a wonderful campus. Taking the tour of such an immense location in the middle of the woods, it is just gorgeous. The curriculum that I understand you were explaining to myself, it is wonderful to see such well-rounded individuals, students who are learned and being taught in such a fine fashion that you have established.
Well, I think you know that much of that was cultivated within me during 5 ans dans la belle France. Those 5 years that I was there was of great inspiration to me in many respects. So much that I saw that I hope to bring back to our nation, improve the tastes of our countrymen, French excellence, French elegance, and always French idealism. In fact, the lawn itself and all of the pavilions, the attachment of the rooms, the rotunda, you may know, as I remarked when we spoke in Paris, those many years ago, was influenced by the Chateau de Marly. That trip I was able to take out from Versailles to the chateau. I was told about it by many, but in particular the Causeways, Richard and his wife Maria Causeway. Upon the particular trip, Mr. Causeway was unable to attend. So Mrs. Causeway and I traveled to the market, and there you approached on a precipice, and she said, Monsieur Jefferson, alight from the carriage, walk to the precipice, look down into the valley. And when I did, I was struck with this most beautifully designed chateau. And there it was, pavilions opposite one and the other, all connecting like a sea with the chateau there in the center of the sea. And in front of all of the pavilions, the chateau itself, fountains that were animated, if you will, by water that was cascading down a great mountain beyond the open end of the sea, cascading down, animating these fountains from a reservoir on top of the mountain, in which the water was pumped from the Seine River upon the opposite side, pumped up to this reservoir, come down to animate the fountain. And it struck me right there upon the spot, gentlemen, the fount of knowledge. The fount of knowledge. And so I have employed that in its design. So I thank you very much, General, for your compliments. And we're looking forward to more boys enrolling in the future.
But of course.
And girls. There's one behind you. She seems to know more than any boy enrolled in our discipline of natural philosophy.
Mr. Madison, and thank you for your comments, Mr. Jefferson. I appreciate that. I wanted to get back to a comment you had made about the Onondaga. Maybe you think about a memory I have involving the Six Nations of the Iroquois, also called the Haudenosaunee, what is now New York, the world's first constitutional democratic republic that started several hundred years ago, which our nation modeled itself after. You had mentioned the Onondaga, the Oneida, a nation, and also the Tuscarora, two of the Six Nations, sided themselves with the American forces during the Revolution. And our esteemed friend here, General Lafayette, had much to do with bringing them 47 of their tribesmen to Valley Forge during the winter of 77-78 for the express purpose of assisting our troops. And alongside them were Polly Cooper and Chief Shenandoah, also referred to as Chief Shenandoah. And Polly Cooper was responsible for teaching the soldiers how to get the most nutrition out of corn. We know that, and President Jefferson, I know you're a student of our Indian brothers and sisters, and I appreciate your endeavors to increase our knowledge and their wherewithal within our nation. Those people have had several thousands of years developing corn. It wasn't a product of Europe. It wasn't found. It wasn't there until it was brought back from the Americas to Europe. So, the most nutritious way to get the most nutrition out of corn is to prepare it as corn porridge, and Native peoples know this. And so, Polly Cooper taught all the American soldiers how to prepare corn and get the most benefit from it during that brutal winter encampment. So, thanks to General Lafayette for venturing out during that winter to make inroads with the Oneida and bringing them along with members of the Tuscarora Nation down to Valley Forge. That was a chance for us to work with them. They soldiered with us during the war. They were allies, and another indication of your great efforts during the American Revolution to help our...
Well, it was the coldest winter, and there was not much to do with the armies not moving, so of course, finding friends to join in our misery was, of course, the perfect thing.
Right, exactly.
It was well reflected when we were in New York at Fort Stanwix, and the representatives of the Iroquois tribe and the Seven Nations were there. There was an effort on the part of New York and also from the United States and Congress assembled to secure treaties with these tribes. But it was evident, and each and every day, that the presence of you, Monsieur, was obviously the most exciting event that the Indians were to witness during that time, that the efforts on the part of the whites to secure treaties at that time were set aside almost at the point because of the adulation of the Indians with yourself. And it was refreshing to see such enthusiasm on the part of the natives for your arrival there, and to witness the difficulties on the faces of some of those others who were sent to secure these treaties. We ended with the Onondaga Treaty in 1795, and it was the course of events leading up to that time that was so significant with that Onondaga Treaty in 1795, and certainly your work during that time, and the image that you created amongst those Indian tribes, the enthusiasm they had for your company was largely responsible for the success of those Indian treaties later on. Well done.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So much, General, so much. Our nation has to be grateful for unto you. So much that we cannot possibly forget, and must continue to relate unto the present generations and generations yet unborn. And the essential fact that the American Revolution, gentlemen, would have never been successful without the aid of France. Never. They must never forget this. And this is why, General, you have been so gracious to bless us with your visit, your company, once again. Because, as you may know, so many of us of those revolutionary years, those born before, even those during, are now, as we approach our remarkable 50th anniversary, they're passing by the wayside every single day. We cannot allow that history to pass by the wayside as well. And I think it is brilliance, Mr. President, that you have invited the General to come visit with us. And the more so, General, that as you have already visited in New York and Pennsylvania and Jersey and now here, that you will proceed throughout all of our 24 states. Is this correct? This is remarkable.
I have pledged myself to visit every one of these 24 states of the Americas.
Do you know that several years ago, 18 and 20, our census revealed our population now at 9,600,000. Can you imagine 9 million? We were not even 4 million during the war. And to think how our nation is rallying with your return, to visit you, every young individual there, to be able to see you in the flesh, to approach you and shake your hand, just as I remember you shaking hands with the late General. I declare, did you visit Mount Vernon?
But of course, I paid tribute to my adopted father, visiting his monument, his gravesite. It saddens me that I could not make it one more time in his lifetime to visit.
You've had an extraordinary experience in Europe since the end of our revolution. And the fact that you can return and that there's such an effusion of sentiment throughout the 24 states and the 3 territories we have just now, it's certainly in all the newspapers and gazettes of your arrival and the preparations made for it. It has a significance far beyond the actual attendance on your part to each one of these places, where those individuals who greet you and receive you have the opportunity to be in your company and to follow you for miles along the road as you proceed to your next visit. But it does have a larger consequence for our own country. And I think that certainly President Monroe and certainly Mr. Jefferson have given references to it, that it reminds us that the course of events that took place during the course of that revolution, the uncertainty, the deprivations people suffered, not only on the field of support for those, but also certainly on the field of battle, the wounds that you suffer, that you carry with you every single day, and that so many people have done. I was not so honored to serve in the nation in a military capacity. My own constitution probably would have endangered my compatriots rather than enhanced them. but the course of events and the circumstances that were refreshed in the minds of Americans during your sojourn thus far and will continue to be so helps to refresh those who were not even born during that time, that they may witness the accounts of not only your sojourn some 40 years ago and 50 years ago, but also your presence now. And future generations may have to project themselves to see the degree of enthusiasm that now circulates our country. It's most extraordinary, and one cannot state it enough. Our glee and our joy to have you here personally, certainly to refresh myself in your company, sir. A delight. I mentioned the fact of you having that rather curious wrap that was wrapped apparently in it was a gum tree apparently cover, and you certainly entertained us with accounts on those newspapers. It's only one element of the reflection of those times.
There was a lot to read. You have highlighted, you have mentioned a lot of what I contributed. Lest we not forget that it was your ideas, it was your Declaration of Independence that I read for the first time in French, that I was inspired to join your cause. I was inspired to fight for those rights of man, these liberties, these freedoms that you so wrote about, Monsieur Jefferson. It is this that caused me to, as I imagine, to do my duty to fight for the rights of man, the common man, and to fight for this other nation, this other land that is suffering so much with this tyranny that you spoke of.
Speaking
So
of
if
that,
it wasn't for that,
right,
I would not have paid for my own way to come here.
true.
I would not have taken on the position of, they say honorary major general. I was not honorary. As a major general, not being able to pay me my commission as a major general, I tell them I will do it with my own monies, because I so believed in this right, this idea, to fight for it, to come to the aid of your peoples. And this is why I still, even today, consider myself not only a friend of the Americas, but it is my, as Washington had said, my family's.
Those comments are very apropos, sir. Turning to the next chapter, the French Revolution. I'd like to reminisce a little bit about that. I have some personal reminiscences about my time as American minister to France in 1794 to 1796. Trying and challenging times for me as American minister, especially with Mr. J in England, but well, that's another topic for another time. But be that as it may, during that time, and when we were trying to maintain our relationship with France and also maintain neutrality per Washington's administration, there were concerns for your own family. Your wife, Adrienne de Lafayette, was imprisoned at the College Plessier, which had been turned into, from a college into a prison, and there was much concern on the part of her wherewithal, and we were very, very much concerned about how to proceed in light of our relationship with the French government about securing her liberty. And as I was working my way through possible scenarios, my wife, Elizabeth Monroe, came up with an idea. She would make the appearance at the prison on the behalf of the American people to try to set her free, and instead of myself. And so late in the fall of 1794, excuse me, we set up on a coach from our home in Paris, and she made her way to the prison site. And at that time, carriages were sort of a spectacle, because they've been pretty much removed from the landscape because of the conditions of the strife and how people were viewing the aristocracy at that time. And so all of a sudden there's this carriage making its way down the streets of Paris to the prison, and the crowd developed. The crowd followed her and then saw this woman get out of a carriage and accompanied by liverymen who were suited appropriately in matching clothing, and everyone was asking, who is this woman? And it was the Belle Americaine, Elizabeth Monroe, who the term was applied to my wife, and I'm grateful for the recognition of her beauty and her eloquence. And she addressed the guard keeper there, and she was allowed to meet with Adrian. Adrian was brought down to meet with her, and they had a delightful conversation in light of the circumstances, of course. And Adrian was very, very excited to see my wife, and they talked about hopefully securing her freedom. And a few months later, that happened, one day before her scheduled execution. And we are very grateful to have set her free. Remarkably, she and your daughters joined you at Almont's prison and volunteered to go in to stay with you until you were released from prison in 1797, and then your exile in Holland for 2 years before you returned to France. Remarkable return, but under trying circumstances. But Mr. Jefferson, do you have any thoughts about that time when Lafayette was facing not only imprisonment, his wife was facing imprisonment, but also the nature of the times which we were all set upon?
Now, Mr. President, you are not putting upon me, are you?
No, sir, I'm not.
Accusation that I am a friend of revolution. There are far too many who continue to refer to me as that red-breeched radical revolutionary Jefferson. But the Marquis knows, and so does Mr. Madison and you. Yes, I will ever remain in favor of the French people rising up after generations, if you will, being kept down. I saw them all throughout France, misery etched deep into their faces because of the determination of the French court to keep them down, keep them and leave them there. And yet to realize that they could not possibly remain there, learning of the victory of the American Revolution. And when they read, of course, documents of the founding principles of our nation, first and foremost, not only our Declaration, but the Statute of Virginia for religious freedom, followed, if you will, by our Constitution. And then to realize, after several years of disastrous crops, that, what was it, about 150 years, they decided now, finally, we must reconvene the Estate Generals. We must do something about this. And it was too late. It was too late. Oh, you know, gentlemen, I have said the tree of liberty must be continually refreshed with the blood of patriots as well as of tyrants. And in this nation, that has been our natural manure. Well, thank heaven there are no women present who might be offended by it. But gentlemen, we know that's the Latin name for hand, manus, the continual cultivation of liberty. And so therefore, when Mr. Madison asked me some time ago, what happened with the French? Why was their revolution such a bloodbath as it evolved? You may remember, sir. I said, I believe it is because here in our former colonies, there was no monarchy looking directly over our shoulders. The English court was not there demanding that we plow this field or that. Yes, we were besieged with the corruption of the enslaving of our fellow man by the Royal African Company, providing, if you will, the great fortunes of gentry still there in Great Britain. But no, the point is we had tasted the sweetness of liberty. And when that began to be soured, we rose up in a frenzy of retaliation and grabbing, if you will, those reins once more, we could drive ourselves forward. General, as you know, the French and the majority of people upon this globe have never tasted that sweetness of liberty, and therefore we must be the best example that man is capable of self-government. To remind generations yet to come we're the first nation in the history of man founded upon principle and ideas, not upon monarchy and royalty and aristocracy. That's why we fought the war. That's why we shed our blood. And that is why, Mr. Madison, I was able to explain to you the great honor to collaborate with General the Marquis de Lafayette on what became the French Bill of Rights and the Citizen. I know you have framed it, have you not, right next to our Declaration of American Independence?
I keep that on my mantle with the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and our document that we work together. Declarations of Rights of Man and Citizens.
You know, many have asked me, Mr. Jefferson, did you bear witness to the oath in the tennis court? You know, General and Mr. President, Mr. Madison, I explained that I was nearly every single day at Versailles. Nearly every single day when the Estate Generals met there, and oh, that most beautiful emporium, the Menu de Plaisirs, if you will, the great banqueting hall. And let me simply say this, yes, I remember when the Third Estate, the bourgeoisie, over 570, went to enter into that emporium, the door was locked. And, of course, they turned about to look for another building that could accommodate them, and what did they find down the Avenue Versailles? A tennis court, La Salle de Jean de Paume, and there they gathered, and you were there. And so was Monsieur Dupont, Pierre Samuel Dupont, Bally, the mayor of Paris. And they pushed that plinth into the center of the hall. Mayor Bally stood up on the plinth. And what happened? It was most remarkable. Like the oath of the Rashi brothers, everyone leaned in to take that oath in order to establish a constitutional monarchy. No, I was not there. There was a gallery, as you well know, there was a gallery, and the gallery was full, I had been told. But what an extraordinary occasion. Not a one of us ever thought about what might ensue trying to establish a constitutional monarchy.
Mr. Madison, your thoughts, sir, on the French Revolution.
Well, at the time that we were listening to accounts from Europe, and certainly in that year of 1789, we were embarking upon establishing our own government in this country. We were concerned about securing tariffs on trade in the spring of that year. And we were also concerned about introducing amendments to the Constitution that might reflect more pronouncedly a Bill of Rights that would enhance the people's confidence in the new government. There was a great deal in establishing precedents in the Congress. So the attention given to foreign events was acute, but it did not dominate our sentiments at the time. We were very much engaged, at least I was very much engaged, in establishing a new government and to satisfy the discontent of those who did not wish to ratify the Constitution, and to set to rest the distinction in American minds between the limited powers of a national government and the plenary powers of the state government. But having done so in 1789 in the first Congress, in 1790 and 1791, we begin to turn our attentions to those events in Europe that would be so consequential in the United States. The growing discontent between Great Britain and France, and the difficulties ensuing in Europe would eventually affect our own commerce in this nation. And then to hear word of the events that took place between 1789 and 1793, and then hear the accounts written in the newspapers of those who had been guillotined and their heads placed about pikes in Dijon and other cities in France. These are horrendous images in the minds of those here in the United States. It certainly made a great half of the United States discontented with the French progress towards liberty and independence. They thought it was all well and good for the United States, but a dramatic retraction of spirit of liberty and independence and freedom when it's at such a particular horrendous cost in the execution of the monarch and such. I don't wish to preach to Monsieur Lafayette. He was there, he was witness to a great deal of what was happening in France, and far more perceptibly than I could ever establish myself to be. But it did certainly put a mark on our own things and our own appreciation of our own independence. And notwithstanding the nature of the controversies that were extant at the time and the growing dissensions and political opinions so adverse to one another, giving evidence in the 1790s in this nation, we need only look to Europe, the feudal systems under which they were governed, the monarchies under which they lived, to begin to appreciate that whatever the hazards we are witnessing in the United States, they could not be quite so great or so demonstrably hazardous to the welfare of the people as that which we were witnessing in France at the time. I would have liked to have been certainly a member and witness to those matters. In fact, at one point, Mr. Washington asked me to become a minister to negotiations in France. But I turned it down only because my willingness to sail on blue water was rather diminished. And as I was reluctant to command troops in the field, so was I reluctant to find myself on one side or another of a ship and in danger of falling off it. So I refused that position and have never left the country as a consequence. But certainly the copious correspondence that we retained in France from people in France at the time was highly reflective of those events, and certainly let us feel much more appreciative of our own nation at the time.
Gentlemen, the occasion of our esteemed guest, the nation's guest, the hero of two worlds, is so important to us, not just for sentimental reasons, but to remind those, our younger generations. As Mr. Jefferson had pointed out, many of our veterans are daily disappearing from the landscape. I'm 66 now, and many of my friends from the Revolution are now gone to a better place, I believe. But having said that, we need to remind our younger generations of the sacrifices that were made during the American Revolution to secure the freedoms that we enjoy today, and for growth towards improvement in the future. So it's incumbent upon us not only to enjoy the time we have with our guests here over these many months. I'm glad to hear that you'll be here for an extended visit, sir. But also to reminisce about the fact that we're coming up on, as you said, our 50th anniversary, 50 years since the American Revolution. And this is a grand experiment in constitutional democratic democracy. So here's to a better day as we move forward. And I see that it's dinner hour now. So Mr. Jefferson, would you do the honor of leading us out, sir, so we'll be on time for our dinner engagement?
Oh, yes. Any opportunity to stand at the forefront to go to supper, I'm more than happy to take.
All right, so gentlemen, just make our way carefully.
Oui, Commander-in-Chief took in charge, taking the lead that I found from the Americas in the militia. These you call Minutemen, men of the minute, to organize, not with the regular soldiers, but with a National Guard unit to be ready to put down mobs, riots, and other things in this revolution of ours. There are several instances where I would have to travel from city to city, town to town, and I could not be everywhere all at once. So, of course, dispatching as much as I could to other cities. There are several instances where the king and the queen themselves are at odds with the people, and just by being there in uniform, creating, of course, our first national flag, the French national flag, Because if you are not aware, every flag that flew over France before I created and helped to create the national flag was based off the family that was in charge. And so our now national flag, there are my critics that would definitely look down upon this brand new red, white, and blue flag. Creating, of course, a cockade that I would bestow upon the king to also show the unity, bringing the people together, the French unity, the Union cockade, which is also red, white, and blue. Then, as President Madison has mentioned earlier, the institution of the guillotine and the numbers of people that lost their lives, the closer and closer and closer it would get to my own family and my wife. Now, my wife is the cousin of King Louis, and so the closer it would get to our own family, there was a warrant out for my arrest. And with this warrant, I would tell my family that I needed to have them remove themselves from France to get to the Americas. And my son would make it here. My daughters and my wife, as was mentioned earlier, will be thrown in prison. I will take a small group of soldiers and cross into the Austrian border and immediately become arrested myself, spending 5 years in this prison, being moved around from prison to prison to prison, finally ending up in Olmutz, which you mentioned earlier. So there was a number of things that went on in the several years, and trying to quell the antagonistic, what you call war hawks, these hawks of war, to quell this so that we could come to an agreement to maybe peacefully, after shedding the blood of liberty, as Mr. Jefferson has so kindly mentioned, that maybe we could move forward as a constitutional monarchy, the way I believe we should move forward as a nation. And I hope that answers your question, Monsieur.
You know, General, may I let you know that while we were in France, and as you designed the flag, and particularly the cockade, do you remember gifting my daughter, but a young girl at the time, dear Patsy, Miss Jefferson, you gifted her with that cockade, newly designed by you. She still has it. She treasures it. It's right there on her bed table. So I want you to be able to visit, and rest assured, she always was quite taken with you.
Merci.
As we all are.
Merci.
My question is to the Marquis. What is your recollections? I think you were here in Fredericksburg a couple of times, and you visited Elwood and met with Mr. William Jones on a couple of occasions. What is your recollection of Elwood?
I can tell you that every time that I visited not only the Virginias but also this Elwood that you speak of, I am enamored not only with the beauty of this country, the friendship of everyone that I've run into. I've never been more well received than being in the Americas. The grand balls, the dinners that we have at Elwood, I could not pass up the chance to revisit and to spend time with. And I believe I spent more than just a couple of days there.
I see the future. I can't predict the future, obviously. I do believe that our nation has developed itself over the course of 50 years in such a way, modeled after, as I mentioned, the Onondaga, the Oneida, Cayuga, Seneca, Tuscarora, those nations, the first constitutional democratic republic in the world, to live in peace with one another, to respect one another, to listen to one another, to grow together one another, and not to war. They warred among each other for hundreds of years before they settled their differences, laid down their war clubs, their bows and arrows, their spears, and agreed to disagree. and live together in peace. And I think we can do that here in this nation. We have, as the President Jefferson pointed out, 9 million people living in our nation now. That's a large number of people, many with different opinions about themselves, about their society, their place in life. Perhaps they have grievances, perhaps they're happy, perhaps there's a medium at some point. But nevertheless, we all need to work together. And I see the future of our nation as a bright one from my standpoint. Right now, we're embarked 10 days into the election of 1824. It started October 22nd. The election will go to December 2nd. And we have a heavily contested election among 4 individuals in the same party. And I see factionalism developing. I see discord now that I didn't see at the beginning of my term 7.5 years ago. And that troubles me. But it's an opportunity to work together, to listen together, and to work to overcome grievances and establish a better future for ourselves. In terms of European monarchies, I think some of them may be around for an extended period of time. I do believe their constitutional monarchies have proven successful. I know there's no room for despots or dictatorships in the world, and we'd like to see that type of government not in this part, not in our Western Hemisphere. And I hope I answered your question, sir.
General, what about the French?
Well, I can say in these rare instances where France is not at war with Great Britain, it is nice to know that we have an additional friend in the Americas. But in all seriousness, a constitutional monarchy is where I hope our country goes, taking the lead on, as you mentioned in the past, this experiment upon government that you have here, and using this as our light, our beacon, so that maybe we can address and fix some of our own centuries and centuries and centuries of tyranny and of holding the commoners or the peasants down.
It's very fundamental in the American experience to commence a government that is predicated upon the sovereignty of the people in terms of its of the authority that is engaging the people's attention. In starting our own Declaration of Independence, to assert the rights of free men, to assert the inalienable rights of people to govern themselves rather than to be ruled by others. And the consequences of that kind of decision, that kind of an action taken by a people here in North America has many, many implications to the government that will ensue that is founded upon the sovereignty of the people. Governments are instituted amongst men for many different reasons, but justice is one of them. It's also to diffuse the malevolent activities of members of the society that have perhaps pernicious, parochial, partisan, perhaps even personal gain in succeeding in a nation that is governed upon the sovereignty of the people. They can abuse that. They can lead the general populace into routes that seem to be favorable, but will not be favorable. It is ripe for malevolent behavior on the part of the people, who the people choose as their representatives. But fundamental in the democratic society also is that the great numbers of people will choose from their own constituencies those who are reasonable men, who may not have the same political inclinations as their constituency, but the constituency exercises its sovereignty by choosing their representatives. And as one proceeds in higher elevations of the society, of the political government, those individuals also will choose from amongst their number the more reasonable, even though they may not be politically the same, of a same opinion. This engaging a sovereign people to govern themselves rather than to be ruled by others has not been preceded in the annals of mankind by any other government. And that is why it is an experiment. 50 years after the Declaration of Independence, we look to some of our leaders, but we don't look at them as monarchs. We don't celebrate the birthdays as they do in monarchies. We do not have coronations. This nation finds its personal value in the symbols of that society, the flag, the arrival of an illustrious citizen to remind us of all that traversed prior to this year of 1824, and to infuse in the American citizens a regeneration of that spirit of liberty that began the nation, and the reason and moderation that followed it to acquiesce and to ratify a constitution that sets up a framework by which these various opinions, these almost conflicting opinions, exist in our nation, but don't have the effect of destroying the nation. This element of liberty is a very important beacon for the rest of the world who has not shared in our own triumphs, who have not necessarily witnessed the tribulations that we suffer in this nation, but look to us as a beacon of hope. And whenever we have an illustrious citizen, and this, believe me, is the first that I've witnessed in 50 years, not since the passing of George Washington has the nation come so much together on the same opinion of an event. But your arrival here reinfuses the spirit that began our nation, that reminds us of the trials and tribulations we suffered, the sacrifices that people had to make to be where we are here in 1824. And I hope that we can, by our own actions, engender that same regenerative spirit in subsequent generations. It's natural for the course of events to take place amongst the people and then have abbreviated accounts to the next generation. And the generation after that, more abbreviated accounts of what had transpired at first. To the point where 5 generations transpired, you've got 4 abbreviated accounts of the original event, and the true anxiety, the true suffering, the true nobleness of people is lost in those abbreviated accounts of history. So each time when you arrive to a new city, you regenerate that original feeling, that original tendency. You remind us what we have done when we lose sight of that by our own daily activities. We are graciously appreciative of not only what you gave then, but what you symbolize to us now.
Well said, sir.
Gentlemen, you have often heard me, General, the Marquis, and Mr. President, refer to Mr. Madison as the most luminous mind I've ever known. Oh, yes. Citizens, he knows more about ancient history, what has gone wrong, and what we may benefit from than any other individual I've ever known. And as we know, nothing comes from nothing. The extraordinary invention of our nation is based upon the wisdom of the past. The past was not less intelligent than we are today. We have much to learn from them. Why? Because they lived it all. And this is why I remain an advocate of history, an advocate of education, if you will. We have far to go. The American Revolution is not over. Think about what Cicero wrote thousands of years ago. Man will always be one generation removed from barbarism. You know what that means? It only takes one generation to forget. And then you fall backward. You wonder, can you make it up again for the ensuing generations? The past knew well, the Romans particular. Ignorance is not bliss. And maybe some of you have read, as I have written, that nation which expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization expects what never was and never shall be. We must continue to learn from the past. And yes, at present, you are correct. We are perhaps no better off than an old Roman republic. We are a republic, but oh no, we have miles and miles yet before us to go in owning up to that first line in our Constitution. Here's the father sitting with us tonight. The first line, citizen, is we. No, sir, that's my creation, the Declaration. The first line in the Constitution is we the people. Now, not a soul here should think they are less inferred in that first line than anyone else. That represents your inherent right to self-government. It represents your inherent right to equal and exact justice, the rights you know, let us not forget, that are given to mankind not by any ruler. Rulers do not give rights. These are rights that are not given by governments. Governments do not give rights. The only legitimate purpose of any government and its laws is simply to protect people from injury by one and the other. That's it. Rights come from nature, nature's God, equally, worldwide. And that is the message in our Declaration of American Independence, that all eyes may open and continue to open to the inherent rights of man. So here we are, as you heard this evening, still a republic. Here we are in this presidential election year of 24. Who will be well, this we were just talking about it. That's what, who will be decided? We will not know until all the votes are tallied. But the point of the matter is, still approaching our 50th anniversary, still no different when we were governed by a monarchy 3,000 miles away, throughout our 24 states, throughout our population 9,600,000, who here still does not have a vote or a voice or may be elected to our government? Women, no vote, no voice. Who else? Not only the enslaved, anyone of color. The natives of this land, no vote, no voice. Anyone of a particular hue from a foreign land who has every right to come here, just like you all, no vote, no voice. A white male, 21 years of age or older, who does not hold property. A white male, 21 years of age or older, who holds property but is mortgaged. I don't want to know who you are. But you know it's not your property. It belongs to your creditor, and your creditor may be a wealthy woman of color. It makes no matter. No matter her wealth, she still does not have a vote or a voice. So the only one that we continue to recognize at the helm of our government is the white male freeholder, still secured in many of our states in the goods and chattels represented in their fellow man. And that franchise represents less than 6% of our population. There's a republic, an entitled franchise under the government in power. So I ask you, does that franchise represent the first line in our Constitution? There's our work. This is what we're working towards. The first universal democracy in human history in which every single individual in our nation will have a voice and engage that inherent right, which is there under the laws of nature. I only wish to say I was not present that day in October 1781 when the surrendering British Army marched upon the surrender field at Yorktown, led by their military band. You were there, General, and you remember their band was playing a British drinking song. Has anyone heard what the melody they were playing? There, they heard, the world turned upside down. In other words, could this be the beginning of the end of monarchy? How blessed we are to know that there are two new political economies on this globe, as we all know it this year, 1824, that have mimicked, if you will, I don't want to use that word lightly, but you know what I mean, our Declaration of American Independence, the one for our friends, France, without whom that revolution would not have been successful. The other is the more extraordinary, 1804. The Declaration of Haitian Independence, led by a slave rebellion. Indeed, citizens, the eyes of the world are upon us as to whether our American experiment in self-government will survive.
Well said, Mary. heard a few individuals in our nation refer to the founding fathers. And I think that, I remember you even referred to me, as some has said, that I am the father of the Constitution. Well, it's actually the work of many heads and many hands. No one individual could have produced that document or secured its ratification throughout the nation. But it does, when one reflects upon history, seem to imply that the establishment of our government under the Constitution, its ratification, is the last step in the experiment. But what it should emphasize is that every generation is itself a founding generation of the nation, for they must accept or reject or analyze or alter that system of government, how it applies to people, where the forms of justice come in, where we extend from 6% to maybe 10% of the nation involved in the decisions of this nation. It may grow, but no generation is safe in perhaps refusing to accept their responsibility as a founder of the Constitution and this experiment. That's why it's an experiment. It has no end. It has no singular beginning that is applicable for all time. It is constantly to be adjudged for its efficacy and altered when it is not efficacious.
As you will be heading out to Missouri, I believe, to St. Louis?
That I will, and so I've been told.
Yes. Well, because, where did the gentleman go? He was standing on, oh, sir, I've been told that I was solely responsible for the success, particularly of the purchase of New Orleans. That was our original object. But then, of course, amended to that was over 830,000 square miles west of the Mississippi River. I actually had very little to do with it. When we learned that our right of deposit was suspended in New Orleans, we had to find some method to seek a route of commerce. It could be the Missouri River itself. That's why I commissioned that expedition, led by my kinsman, my secretary, Captain Lewis. But then we also wondered whether we might have the opportunity to purchase, but not before. I had the idea, why even wait for those negotiations? Conquer it, take it over. You may remember, General, it was our good friend, a gentleman to whom I was introduced in Paris by Dr. Franklin in the Lodge of the Nine Sisters, Monsieur Pierre Samuel Dupont, who had come here with his family and convinced me, no, you will flatter the French far more by offering to purchase. And so it was I then commissioned Robert R. Livingston, who was on the committee to draft our declaration, as Minister Plenipotentiary to seek those negotiations. And it was when he arrived there and engaged in negotiations with Barbé de Marbois, we referred to him earlier, who was here, let alone General Bonaparte, Talleyrand at the same time. It was Livingston who was successful. And remember those treaties that came, I say treaties, one in French, one in English. They arrived on my desk the 14th of July, 1803, Bastille Day, and, you know, now be cautious, the Federalist would like you to think that I signed it away, fait accompli, usurping beyond even the authority of my office. I did not. I followed the Constitution, which states distinctly any treaty for ratification proceeds where? Congress, and that's exactly where they went. And it was our Congress, though they stalled initially, I thought perhaps an amendment might be necessary to allow this opportunity, but it was our Congress, our government, that finally came through with that ratification. So I thank you for the recognition, but Mr. Madison, you were Secretary of State.
Yes, the issue of the Mississippi, which predicated certainly the attempt to purchase New Orleans and then eventually led to the purchase in 1803, was preceded a number of years. After the war was over, the treaty in 1783 granted to the United States lands beyond the Appalachians all the way to the Mississippi. Those were lands that the British prohibited us from inhabiting prior to the revolution itself. So the issue then for the people holding the lands west of the Appalachians was rather critical because the waters flow away from the Appalachians to the Mississippi. And so those west of the Mississippi, east of the Mississippi, but west of the Appalachians wanted to have a water route down to New Orleans. And in 1802, as Mr. Jefferson had suggested, the representative, the superintendent there, had closed the port in 1802, in November of 1802, and obviously excited the passions of those whose rafts were on the Mississippi already making their way to New Orleans. The Spanish could fickly allow the opening of the port or closing of the port. It would really spoil the prospects of those living west of the Appalachians, and that is where the Marquis comes in. At that time, there was a proposal in the Congress to have Mr. Jay from New York engage in a treaty with the Spanish, with Mr. Gardaki specifically. And that Gardaki-Jay treaty was to determine whether the Mississippi would be open or closed. The way the opinion went down was that Mr. Jay was willing to forego the rights to the free navigation of the Mississippi in order that eastern states, northeastern states, and Massachusetts would have better trading arrangements with Spain. And it was then that I had talked with Mr. Lafayette about using his influence in France and also his influence in Spain to try to curb the Spanish prohibition of the use of the Mississippi. It came again later on in 1802 and 1803. And the reason why we promulgated this idea of a treaty with New Orleans is to open the port for all those west of the Appalachians. So the Marquis has had a very pronounced effect of allowing us to use the Mississippi eventually, and to curbing the prohibitions of Spain to allow us the opening of the Mississippi, and then also certainly the subsequent purchase which freed it to American use. The Marquis was very, in fact, many of our conversations at that time in New York were regarding and correspondence thereafter, having you exercise your influence on behalf of the United States for the free opening of the Mississippi. We thank you for that.
But of course.
And Mr. President, I do not want you to think that I am neglectful of pursuing you to be following Mr. Livingston, because in collaboration with Mr. Madison as Secretary of State, we had not heard anything from Livingston for quite some time after he supposedly arrived there. So it was necessary to commission another minister plenipotentiary to seek it out, to seek the information out. Now, here, can you refresh us? Had the treaties already been signed when you arrived?
No. As a matter of fact, when I arrived on the scene, Napoleon offered, as you mentioned, the opportunity to what we were looking for, to acquiring the port in New Orleans. When we offered the opportunity to more than double the size of our country, we were concerned about protocols. But forgiveness being the better object rather than permission, we thought we would go ahead and agree and send it over back to the United States. So it was a grand gesture. We couldn't turn it down. We couldn't say no. And that's how it landed in your lap. But I had a small bit to be involved with that. But thank you, sir, for.
Mr. Monroe was far too modest. He has not only been a colonel in our service, he's also been the minister plenipotentiary to France, our minister to Spain, our minister to England. He's been governor of Virginia. He ran and contested the first congressional district in Virginia. It's the only time I ever bested him, I think.
I think you're correct.
He served as Secretary of War, Secretary of State in the Union, and now he's President of the United States. And amongst his many accomplishments was to succeed in inviting the Marquis de Lafayette to visit our country this year. Congratulations, Mr. Monroe.
We're honored by your attendance here today. Thank you.
Gentlemen, we could literally go on all night. Actually, no, we couldn't. The lights will go off. But we do have one more question.
Monsieur, tell us about your visit with Mary
coming into Fredericksburg to meet Mary Washington and to meet her for the first time. It was a fond introduction. It was one that I will treasure, as well as with every new city, with new people that I will meet, reminiscing with old friends, but also looking at how generation after generation will continue to prosper and to progress in this nation, and looking into the eyes of Mary Washington and seeing the Washington family, seeing the eyes of those of my dear friend, General Washington, President Washington, and being able to not only reminisce but share stories with her that she may not be aware of, personal stories of my time with the General.
Through the immense power granted me by this microphone, I now bring all of us back to the year 2024, and I would like to acknowledge and gratefully thank for their appearance for the first time on any stage together, William Barker, John Douglas Hall, Charles Bissinger, and Fredericksburg's own Jay Harrison.
give him another round of applause.